Well, after talking about Fluent CRM a few times, I am now officially using it, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what it was like to actually switch from Drip to Fluent CRM. Let's get started. Okay, so Drip is a really powerful marketing automation tool. It's been around a long time. It's a very mature platform, okay? And so it works really great, but yet I decided I'm going to switch over to a much younger in-house platform on top of WordPress, Fluent CRM. In some ways, I'll be clear, it's a bit of a downgrade. But that being said, I go into Fluent CRM knowing the advantages of running it in-house for backup purposes and integration purposes inside of WordPress. But I also go into it knowing that it's a younger product and that it's going to get better over time. And so to be clear, when you switch from something really mature like Drip or Active Campaign or something like that, and you switch over to something like Fluent CRM, there's going to definitely be some differences. There's going to be some things that you may be doing on the old platform that you can't do in Fluent CRM right now. And there's going to be some habit changes, some things that are just going to have to change because you're switching to a different platform. And not only that, it's a platform that's on top of WordPress. So it's a little bit different. So I went through the process of switching over to Fluent CRM from Drip. It was a lot of work. It took a lot of time. It's never fun to switch email list platforms, but it's even worse when you're talking about marketing automations and in this case, workflows and rules and all that. And so for that reason, I'm not going to be able to show you here on a video what the whole process was like. I'm just not going to do it. Below this video, if you're on the blog post right now, I documented out a lot of the stuff that I did, including there's even a code snippet below where you can actually run a script and it will, actually create the linkage between the WordPress profiles and Fluent CRM profiles. There's a lot below. And if you're on youtube.com right now, click the link in the description below and go over to the blog post because that's where most of the data is going to be. What I'm going to do with this video is just give you the summary version of kind of how this whole thing went and a few things that I did. It'll be a lot shorter here on video format, and then the meat will be over in the written part. So obviously the first thing I did was install Fluent CRM. That's definitely the easy part. It's a couple of plugins. First you install the core Fluent CRM product, and then the other one is you install the Pro add-on, which gives you the automations and all the cool stuff, okay? And so that's what I did, and then I had to go through a little bit of a process to hook it up to Amazon SES, which is the email service from Amazon Web Services. You can obviously use other SMTP services if you want. I'm just choosing to use Amazon. And a lot of the people that use Fluent CRM also use Amazon, and it works pretty well, come to find out. It's also very affordable, which is nice. And then what I did is once you have it set up, you basically have a blank Fluent CRM sitting in WordPress, and you're like, now what? Okay. Now you can play around with it all that you want. Fluent CRM is a very lightweight setup in terms of it doesn't really impact your site speed because it's using all custom database tables, a custom UI inside of the admin panel. And so you can play around with it and get used to it, install it to your site, even though you've got another platform operating. It's totally cool. So the first thing that I did is I started messing around with the email templates. One thing to keep in mind is that right now there's not a way where you can start creating an email to send to your list and then automatically save it as a template. You have to specifically go in to the email templates section of Fluent CRM and set these things up. And it's worth doing because the block editor that Fluent CRM is using to do emails is just very different than what you're going to find especially in Drip. I had gotten pretty used to the email editor in Drip, and I was not a massive fan of the block editor, to be honest. But I forced myself to get used to it, and I spent the time to create that. And most of my emails are really simple, just a logo at the top and some text. But then you got to think in terms of the font size and the spacing. There's a few things you got to think of there when you're creating these templates. But you will save yourself some time by creating some templates that have the look and feel that you want. And then when you're setting up your automations and your other things, you can just give yourself a head start by using one of these templates. So I would recommend mess around with those email templates, get used to the block editor. You're going to start to find out what some of the differences are. What some people also do, if they don't like the block editor, I have seen, is they will use an external email editor such as Stripo or something like that. And then they get all that the HTML from that email, and you just copy that into Fluent CRM. And if you use something like that, you can actually make Fluent CRM send the most fancy pants emails that you want. But it really works best if your emails are not super loaded, if they're primarily text and some images and some basic stuff. That's what Fluent CRM works the best for. Okay, so after I had a few templates set up just to kind of get me started and give me an idea how that's going to work, the next thing I needed to do was start setting up the list and the tags. Now, with Drip, there's pretty much just one list, and all you do is you set up different segments based on tags, okay? With Fluent CRM, you have both options, and there actually is some use to using the multiple list capability. Now, you're probably not going to have very many, but the thing is that when you're using something like Fluent Forms or even Elementor or however the heck you are trying to bring leads into the system, there is some use to using the multiple list capability because you could trigger automations really easily by putting people onto different lists. You can, it's convenient in that regard. And so I set up a few lists basically for pro members, my free members, and then my Edge subscriber. Those are basically the three lists that I've got in there. And then in terms of the tags, there's no way to import tags from Drip. You have to set them up manually inside of Fluent CRM. The other thing is that you can feel free to rename them. And so if you've been using a marketing automation platform for a long time, you might have some old tag names that you just don't use anymore, or there's like, I wish I didn't name it that, stuff like that. You can actually set up these tags with a naming convention that is new and fresh for you. Also keep in mind, you don't have to bring every tag over. There are a lot of tags that I had inside of Drip that I just never brought over to Fluent CRM because they're just old. This is one of the beauties of, even though it's a lot of work to switch to a different CRM product, it gives you a really good opportunity to kind of clean house and clear out the weeds and simplify things because you're kind of getting all that old stuff out of the system that you're not using anymore. And so I probably had about 90% of the tags that I had in Drip that I just decided not to bother with anymore. And I brought over just the ones that I knew that I was actually going to use. And I manually entered them in. I can name them the way that I wanted that works for me. And that's basically it. But it's a manual process to get those tags in, and then you move on to the next stage. The next thing that I did was I started working on building the automations. And so, this can get into a deep topic. It's obviously going to be very different for every business. So I'm not going to get into specifics on this, but essentially you're going to have workflows and rules over on the Drip side. And if you're using another CRM, you might have a whole different thing going on. And you've got to rebuild them inside of Fluent CRM. And I decided to do it early before I actually brought over any leads, okay? Now, the first thing that I did, because I had been using Drip for so long, is that there were a lot of old automations and workflows and rules that I quite frankly didn't remember what was going on anymore. They were not being used anymore. And so I started going through my Drip account and just looking at the different workflows and rules. And I was like, well, if this is not being used, I just turned it off. I deactivated it. So when I did that, after I was done with that process, I was left with a list of the workflows and rules that were actually being utilized. And then I went over into Fluent CRM and I started rebuilding them on the new platform. And there are differences, not too many, but there definitely are differences between the way that you will do things with Fluent CRM versus the way that Drip does things. There's just no way around that. But you do have some other options available to you. For example, being able to automatically trigger things based on a WooCommerce order. That's kind of handy in some cases. So that's what I did. You basically go through your products, you go through the things that you need to have done, and you set up the basic automations for a welcome sequence for, when people are going to buy particular products in your store. You just set up those things so that when you bring the leads over to Fluent CRM, you're going to have the basics in place. Keep in mind that you can always perfect these things and expand upon them later on after the leads are already inside of Fluent CRM. But I just got the basics in place. That way I knew that when I eventually flipped the switch over to Fluent CRM, there was going to be some basic operations happening. All right, so at this point, I had some framework in place inside of Fluent CRM, but I had no leads. I had some basic automations that were set. I kept them in draft mode because they were not being utilized, and there's no leads in the system anyway. But it's also important that when you do bring the leads into Fluent CRM, you don't want your automations to all start triggering when tags are getting added to their profile. So you want to make sure that all the automations that you set up remain in draft mode, okay? But I have the tags, we've got some lists, and we're kind of ready to rock and roll. Now, one thing that needed to be done, though, is because if I'm going to have two CRMs basically going at the same time there for a little bit, I need to keep things in sync. Because what could happen otherwise is that I start switching the opt-in forms over, or let's say I bring the leads over to Fluent CRM, but the opt-in forms, we're still sending people into Drip. So what would happen is that new leads would go into Drip, they would not be over here, and it could lead to a synchronization problem when I do flip the switch over. So what I did is I actually set it up so that my opt-in forms would actually start putting new leads into both systems at the same time. So I kind of draw that line in the sand and I say, after this time, all the leads are going to be in both systems. And you could do that with a lot of different tools. You can actually have it to where it will add leads into two different email list solutions at the same exact time. And that's what I did. With ConvertBox, you can do that by setting up multiple actions that take place when the form is submitted. Also with Fluent Forms, you can do the same thing. And I'm also using Elementor forms in some spots, and you can do the exact same thing. So it would just send it to Drip, and it would also send it to Fluent CRM. But again, I'm making sure that there's no automations taking place so that Fluent CRM is not actually sending out any emails. Drip was still doing it, but at least they're in the database. And I don't have to worry about losing that particular lead when I do the switch over. Okay, so next came the part where I'm actually starting to move leads from Drip over into Fluent CRM. And this part's a pain in the ass. There's no way to get around this part. It's basically going to be exporting CSV files from Drip and then importing them into Fluent CRM. The thing is, you can't just export your entire list from Drip and then do one big import. You're going to have to do a bunch of them. And that's because you can't import the tags over in the CSV format, at least not with Fluent CRM. And so what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to run criteria inside of your Drip account for, say, export all of my members, for say. And you're going to get a CSV file of your members. And then you go over into Fluent CRM and you import them and then say, well, give them all the member tag. And you're going to have to repeat this process over and over again in order to get different tags added to different people's profiles over in Fluent CRM. The other thing is that when you do an export out of Drip, it's going to export way more data that is needed for Fluent CRM. And it's just kind of the way that like Drip doesn't really give very many options for doing a CSV export. It doesn't allow you to choose what you're exporting. It just dumps it all into a spreadsheet. And so what I had to do is that I had to open up every CSV file in Excel. I had to delete a whole bunch of columns from it that I just know that I didn't need, and kind of generally clean it up. And then I would import that file into Fluent CRM. The other thing is that if you want to respect the unsubscribed or subscribed status, you need to split it up so that you have a different CSV for your active subscribers and another one for your unsubscribes. That way, when you put them into Fluent CRM, you can set the status the way that it should be, and you don't start emailing people again that may have unsubscribed from you in the past. So there's no way around the fact that this is a little bit messy. It's kind of tedious. You're going to be repeating the export and import process over and over again. And you just got to keep in mind that that's the way the process works. If there's ever a chance where you import something into Fluent CRM and there's a risk that you might not have gotten it right, or you may need to undo it, sometimes what you can do is just set up a temporary tag and then make sure that you add that tag to all of those profiles that you just imported. That way, if something doesn't look right when you're done, you can just segment the list for that temporary tag and just delete them all again, and you'll be okay. All right. But that's kind of how it works. There's no fun, no automatic way of doing this. It's just a pain in the butt, a lot of CSV files, export, import, match the fields properly, add the right list and tags to their profiles, and hit the button. And you're going to be doing this over and over again, depending on how many tags and things you've got set up. Now, with a bunch of leads in the system, this is that time where you're going to be going through and you're going to be checking everything and you're going to be setting up some additional plumbing. When you're integrating Fluent CRM into a membership like I am, then you got to set up some automations to create their user profiles and stuff like that. And also synchronize your WordPress profiles with your Fluent CRM profiles. Okay, now I'm not going to get into that here in the video. Again, below in the written portion of this post, there's some more data about how I did that. But one other part that I will mention here in the video is with how I had to flip the switch, because now you've got data, or I had data in Fluent CRM. I got to start using it. I got to start sending emails with it. And I need it to then become the basis of the membership site itself. So I use WP Fusion for the membership site. I have for a long time. It works beautifully with Drip. Okay, but it also works with Fluent CRM. It's just that now it's all in-house. But in order to switch WP Fusion from one CRM to the other, you have to do a reset process. You have to reset WP Fusion, basically revert it back to default settings as if I had just installed it, and I've got to set it up all over again. And so they have a thing in their documentation on how to reset and switch from one CRM to the other. And I basically just followed it. It comes down to removing a couple of tags. If you use any of the link with tag options that I do, if a certain tag shows up on their profile, it automatically enrolls them in various courses and stuff like that. If you're using anything like that, you want to remove them. Okay, you'll put them back later. Then you hit the reset button and you clear out WP Fusion. You then reconnect it with Fluent CRM. You import those fields and tags. You go into WP Fusion settings and you rematch the fields so everything will sync again. And then you're going to let WP Fusion just sit there and churn while it updates everybody's profile. And then at that point, you need to go and check all of your content permissions again. Make sure that they're using the correct tag so everything is restricted properly for your membership site. And then reset up the link with tag so that when the right tag shows up, they're auto-enrolled in the courses and stuff like that. Essentially, just go through and set up WP Fusion all over again is kind of what you need to do. And it's a little bit tedious, but it ain't that bad. WP Fusion makes it about as easy as you can do. But once that's done, the site is now operational in full on Fluent CRM. The only other thing left to do is go back to your opt-in forms and just take off the connection for your previous CRM, which in my case was Drip. So now new leads are not going into Drip anymore. They're only going into Fluent CRM. Okay, so that was the basic process, and as I said, the Blog Marketing Academy is now operating on Fluent CRM in total. I still have the Drip account, but I'm going to be shutting it off. I'm not going to let it renew the next time. One thing I will mention about Drip particularly is that they've got that set up where you can have active leads and you can have inactive leads. Okay, and inactive leads, they sort of sit there in the Drip database, but you cannot do anything with them. But they also don't count against your billing either. And so if you're using Drip particularly and you have inactive leads, you may want to go ahead and download those things, like just get another CSV file and just maybe do it as a backup and store it on your hard drive before you turn off your Drip account, because they are leads. How they ended up inactive is all depending on what you might have going on with your automations. And so the other option, if you didn't want to just back them up on your hard drive, would be that you actually do bring them into Fluent CRM. And that's totally up to you. You just need to make sure that when you import people into Fluent CRM, that you're respecting any previous actions that they may have done in the past. Like, try not to have Fluent CRM start emailing people who unsubscribed from you in the past. Okay, you want to keep cool about it. In my case, because I had some data that was sort of spread all over the place, unfortunately, there were some situations where I honestly did not know if the people still wanted to be on my list or not. And so there were some leads that I had to tag in a particular way on the import process. And then I would email them specifically, almost like a re-engagement, and I would say, listen, do you want in or not? And I would set up a couple of smart links in Fluent CRM. If they clicked on one, I would tag them and tell me that they definitely want to stick around, and I'd make sure that I keep their member profile and the whole thing. If they click the other one, it's them saying, no, I don't want to hear from you anymore, and then I hose them out of the system completely. But for the ones that I did not know about, I did send them an email and give them that option. And if they don't respond, I'm going to treat that the same as if they want to not subscribe. You got to definitely pay some attention to your reputation when you're setting up a new email system, because you're going to probably be setting up with Amazon SES. So if you're using Fluent CRM, you don't want to just start sending out a bunch of emails that might be going out to people who don't want to hear from you anymore, or they might have an invalid email address. You want to do something about that so that you're not starting off on a bad footing with Amazon. You want to keep your account healthy so you're not out there getting flagged as a spammer. So perhaps we'll talk a little bit more about that in a future video and a future post about some ways of cleaning up your list with Fluent CRM or while you're switching over. But in the interim here, that's it. That's the summary version of switching over to Fluent CRM and getting that thing working. If you have any questions, comment below and I can answer them for you. And if you're in a situation where you actually want my help to switch over to Fluent CRM, because it's not exactly a fun process, then get in touch with me. Maybe I can help you do it. Maybe not. It just kind of depends on your situation. Okay. But if you have any questions about that, let me know and I'll get back to you. Talk to you later.